Hey, before we get into the clips, I want to be clear what this video is and what it is not. I have been watching left-leaning and anti-war media cover the war in Ukraine for a long time, and a pattern keeps showing up. A lot of these commentators are not stupid. They are often right that governments lie. They are often right that official stories are too clean. They are often right that empires act cynically. And they are often right that war creates incentives for people who never have to sit under the missiles. So this is not a video where I pretend mainstream coverage is perfect. This is not a video where I pretend Washington is innocent. And this is not a video where I tell you to stop thinking. What I want to talk about is something more specific. Right now, the big example is a Caspian strike. Ukraine hits targets tied to the Iran to Russia route. That is a real wartime event. Then the commentary jumps. Suddenly Zelensky is trying to drag America into war with Russia, or Ukraine is joining the Iran war to buy Donald Trump's favor through Israel. Or if it were really about supply lines, they would hit China too. So this must be theater expansion. Or Ukraine has become Israel. Or this is World War III. Or America basically wrote the whole war years ago. That jump is what this video is about. From fact to invented motive to total story. I am going to walk through three influential lanes. First, Hasan Piker on the Caspian strike. His claims that Ukraine is dragging America in or joining the Iran war for Trump, and that China proves the motive. Second, the Young Turks. Same Caspian story, plus Ukraine became Israel, plus World War III panic. Third, Breaking Points with Scott Horton. The high footnote version of America provoked this. Different styles, same method. My point is simple. These pundits are often more right than wrong about cynicism. They are often wrong about geopolitics. And when political leaders make choices that look cruel, cowardly, or insane, those choices often have a constrained logic, even when that logic is ugly, even when it is self-serving, even when it is self-defeating. So no, this is not trust the Pentagon. This is narrative versus documented record. If a story only works by deleting Ukrainian agency or a Russian-made choice, it is not analysis. It is a narrative. Let us go through the claims one by one. Watch for this pipeline. First a fact, then comes motive invention, then a total story. I will answer every clip the same way. First, what they claimed. Second, the counter. And last, the documented truth. I will use three tests. Agency. Did Ukraine or Russia disappear from the story? Alternative. What endgame are they actually proposing? Constraint. Do they model nuclear risk, stockpiles, coalitions, and domestic politics? Or is it just a gut feeling? Let's walk through this together. Let us start with Hasan Piker. This is about his Caspian strike take. Trump and Iran. Hasan says Russia's invasion is wrong. Fine, but watch the narrative he builds on top of the strike. Here are his claims. Not mine. Claim 1. Ukraine hit an Iranian-linked ship to drag the United States into direct conflict with Russia. Claim 2. Or Ukraine is trying to become useful in the Israel-Iran war. So Trump and the pro-Israel flank give Kyiv more favor. Claim 3. If this were really about cutting Russian supply, Ukraine would hit Chinese ships too. So the real motive must be expanding the Iran theater. We're going to break those claims.
Stupid endeavor because America is directly involved with Iran, but America is not directly involved with Russia because both America and Russia are adversaries to one another and they're nuclear armed nations. So this is an attempt to try to draw the United States into the conflict against Russia directly.
Here's what Hasan claimed. America is directly involved with Iran. America is not directly involved with Russia because both are nuclear armed. So the Caspian strike is an attempt to draw the United States into conflict against Russia directly. Here's a counter. Those two ideas fight each other. If America will not fight Russia because of nukes, that cannot be Kyiv's serious plan. And America is not some random outsider here. Since the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, U.S. pressure helped push Ukraine to give up its nukes in return for sovereign assurances. Russia invaded anyway. American support sits on that broken bargain. The Caspian strike is uglier and more boring than Hasan's story. Iran helped Russia's war machine. Hitting that supply route is interdiction. not a plot to force a nuclear war with Moscow.
To become a more valuable asset, to say, look, we can make plays in the Caspian Sea. We can actually strike Iranian tankers and Iranian ships in the Caspian Sea for you. It's tit for tat. Hopefully you can help us out a little bit more. That's precisely what's going on right now. And Laura Loomer is obviously playing a role in this too, is through Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's precisely the reason why Ukraine is trying to make themselves more valuable to Israel, to Israel's ambitions against Iran, so that Donald Trump will show Zelensky and the Ukrainians better favors and will have a better attitude overall about the Ukrainian conflict and will hopefully help Ukraine further, will increase the aid to Ukraine. That's what's going on here. It's an unbelievably stupid...
Here's what Hasan also claimed. Trump likes winners. Ukraine gained leverage with deep strikes and energy hits. So now Zelensky is trying to look valuable to Israel's Iran war. Strike Iranian ships. Tit for tat. Maybe then Trump helps Ukraine more. The path to Trump's heart runs through Netanyahu. Here's a counter. Grant the boring parts. Trump likes winners. That is true enough. Ukrainian deep strikes and energy pressure can create leverage. Courting a transactional American president is normal for a dependent partner. Then Hasan jumps. Capability demo and logistics strike then become. Ukraine is joining Israel's war, and the Laura Loomer and FDD gossip becomes a master key. Hasan misses that secondary political courtship can exist. That still does not turn every Ukrainian Caspian strike into Netanyahu's errand. Here is a documented truth. The simplest stack is this. 1. This was hit on a supplier network tied to Russia's war on Ukraine. 2. Show long-range capability. 3. Look useful to a president who rewards winners and deals. You can argue the politics are cynical. Cynical is not the same thing as Ukraine became an Israel proxy overnight. You have to keep in mind the U.S. elected Trump as president. The rest of the world has to deal with that choice.
If that's the case, if this is simply about stopping the connection between Russia and Iran, why don't you do it to China? China is perhaps aiding Russia in more significant ways than Iran is. Let your nuts hang. Why won't you do this to China, but you're doing it to Iran? And why are you doing it to Iran now?
Here is Hasan's gotcha. China helps Russia in major ways. So if Ukraine care about supply lines, why hit Iran and not Chinese ships? Why now? Therefore, Hasan argues the motive is expanding the Iran theater. Here is the counter. That sounds clever, but that is not serious escalation analysis. China and Iran are not the same risk class. Striking Chinese commercial shipping risks a crisis with a giant trading power and a central global economy. Interdicting Iranian logistics tied to munitions already used against Ukraine is a different bet. Also, Hasan himself has spent years saying Shahid drones mattered in this war. So Iran is not a random target, pulled from a hat. Why now can have many answers. Here are some of them. Intelligence, route exposure, Trump courtship, wartime timing. Hasan needs to understand that those answers do not automatically equal to please let us fight Netanyahu's war. Here is the documented truth. Motive testing asks what target set matches the war Ukraine and is already fighting. Iran-linked military logistics into Russia matches at war. Attacking Chinese shipping, on the other hand, is a totally different geopolitical explosion. A gotcha is not a document. Hasan does get one constraint right. America has finite interceptors. A bigger Iran war burns munitions that could matter elsewhere, including Ukraine. Multi-theater stress is real. That is a fair warning. It still does not prove his motive story. Ukraine can have leverage from energy strikes, want more American help, and still hit an Iran-Russia supply route for wartime reasons. All of that can be true at once. What is not proven is the total story. That Kiev's real plan is to drag America into war with Russia or marry itself to Israel's Iran campaign as the main point of the strike. That is narrative not record. Now the Young Turks. Different show, same method. They will correctly say Russia aggressed. They will correctly say Trump is transactional. They will correctly say drones matter. They will correctly say overstretch is dangerous. Then they jump to merge wars and secret hand stories.
Zelensky is trying to ingratiate himself, of course, with Donald Trump as the United States gets its ass handed to them by the Iranians in this devastating war that the US is attempting to fight on behalf of a foreign country, and that's Israel, of course. Now, Zelensky thinks that it made sense to attack the Iranian ship because Tehran allegedly supplies Russia with missiles it uses against Ukraine. So why now then? If that is his argument, why now? This war began in 2022. Why did you decide to wait, 4.5 years? 5 years? 4.5 years to go after Iran now? Is it because you are trying to ingratiate yourself with Donald Trump in an effort to get more weapons that the United States doesn't have? We don't have those weapons. Have to do with Ukraine wanting more weapons from the United States. He says that Ukraine is not trying to just enter the war with Iran. Rather, it appears it is trying to merge the Ukraine war with the Iran war. Why? Because if these two wars merge, Ukraine will be a belligerent in the Iran war and America will be a belligerent in the Ukraine war. That is, the US will no longer just be arming Ukraine, but also actively and openly fighting Russia with US personnel. Let that sink in. That is the key objective Zelensky has tried to achieve since 2022. And
here is what the Young Turks claimed. Ukraine struck an Iranian vessel. So Ukraine is merging into the Iran war. And that means World War III risk. Anna also asks, why now? She says the timing proves Ukraine is helping Trump and Israel against Iran. Here is a counter. Watch the pipeline again. Fact. Motive invention. Total story. The fact is a Caspian strike on targets Ukraine says were tied to Iran to Russian military logistics. That is supply interdiction. Iran helps arm the war. That kills Ukrainians. Hitting that corridor is not the same as joining Israel's war. The motive invention is Zelensky wants to merge the theaters, or that he is doing this now to help Trump and Israel. The total story is World War III, but the why now gotcha does not hold. Ukraine did not avoid the Caspian route. It mostly avoided Iranian flagged ships first. Earlier hits were on the Russian end. Russian ports. Russian flagged cargo ships carrying Iran-linked military cargo. Russian warships and platforms. Same supply line, different flag. That makes sense. The primary enemy is Russia. You can break the pipeline without striking Iran's flag, and hitting Iranian flagships raises a different political cost with Tehran. So this is not a brand new front invented for Israel's war. It is a continuing campaign against the supply line. What looks newer is the flag on the ship, not Ukraine suddenly discovering the Caspian corridor. But spillover was already happening. The Houthis have already hit ships in other nations over what Israel has done against Iran. Iran already supplied Russia with thousands of drones and hundreds of ballistic weapons. And North Korea has sent thousands of soldiers to fight for Russia against Ukraine. If vessel strikes equal a fully merged war, then that story started long before the Caspian Sea strikes done by Ukraine. And Ukraine does not want more war. It wants the war forced on them to end. Zelensky offered peace more than once after the invasion. Putin refused. Yes, Zelensky also has reason to look capable to Trump. That is still not proof he is trying to merge wars into apocalypse. Escalation risk can be real. Panic about intent is not analysis. Here is the documented truth. 1. Ukraine framed the Caspian strikes around Iran to Russia military logistics. 2. Iran helps arm Russia's war against Ukraine. 3. Ukraine had already hit Caspian logistics before this latest strike, mostly at the Russian end of the same route. Not a brand new Iranian war invented overnight. 4. Wider spillover already existed. Just to name a few examples. The Houthis, the North Koreans, and Russian Wagner forces fighting Ukrainian special operations in Mali. 5. Zelensky offered peace after the invasion. Putin refused. 6. Fully merge wars is an invented motive sitting on top of those facts.
The second issue is that Ukraine has now become basically Israel. Now, why do I say that? We're a rare show that talks about this phenomenon. It's really important. Remember, Russia was helping Iran and Syria. Israel needed Russia distracted so they could topple Bashar al-Assad. Oh wait, that happened, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
During the Ukraine-Russia war. And that Iran couldn't be helped when Iran was attacked. Oh right, that also happened during the Ukraine-Russia war. So Ukraine and Israel working together to keep Russia busy so that Israel can attack its neighbors and take more territory. So before that was apparent to people who were paying attention, now it's more than apparent, it's obvious because Ukraine is literally joining the war and attacking Iran.
Here is what Jen claimed. Ukraine has become basically Israel, a dependent partner dragging America into wider war. And Ukraine war functions to keep Russia busy so Israel can topple Assad or strike Iran. Here's the counter. This is audience-tested compression. It is not geopolitics. Yes, Ukraine depends on Western arms. Yes, Israel has its own U.S. relationship and lobby politics. Yes, Iran links the conflicts because Iran supplies Russia and fights Israel and U.S. interests. Yes, when Russia is tied down in Ukraine, its bandwidth for partners can shrink, and other actors can exploit that. None of that makes Ukraine into Israel. Ukraine's war aim is survival against Russian conquest and occupation. Israel's wars are a different conflict system with different goals. The conspiracy move is this. Because Israel benefited while Ukraine fought, Ukraine must exist for Israel. That is not evidence. That is fan fiction with a map. States free ride on other states' wars all the time. Opportunism is not authorship. Ukrainians are not dying so Netanyahu can have a calendar opening. Here is the documented truth. Overlapping adversaries create overlapping interests. That is normal. It does not convert Ukraine into an Israeli project, and it does not make a Caspian logistics strike proof of that identity.
You guys all need to read the 2018 paper that was put out by the RAND Corporation called Overextending Russia. It's basically the anti-Russia version of the anti-Palestinian clean break memo. But it's even more overt, it's even more candid about what the game plan is. You get what I'm saying? So
One more Young Turks style claim. They point to the 2018 RAND paper called Overextending Russia. They treat it like a blueprint, as if later events are just a plan revealing itself. Here's the counter. An options memo is not a remote control. Yes, U.S. think tanks publish ways to stress rivals. Yes, some American elites wanted Russia bled if it invaded. That still does not prove Russia invaded on Washington's schedule. That still does not prove Ukraine fights as Rand's puppet. That still does not prove every Ukrainian strike is chapter execution. Hawks having preferences is not the same thing as one document authoring history. Quote Rand as an options paper. Do not promote it into scripture.
Now, I never said World War III before. A lot of people said World War III in many different instances, and I thought it was hyperbolic, okay? But wait a minute now. So now we have Iran and Israel and America at war, but also Lebanon and the Palestinians kind of, although they have no weapons, and they're just there to get slaughtered. And then the Houthis join in with Iran, and now Saudi Arabia and the Houthis. And remember, Iran attacked the Gulf countries, so now Kuwait and even Jordan, and let alone the Gulf countries like UAE, et cetera, are involved, Bahrain. So now there's already a gigantic war. And then Ukraine comes in and hits Iran. So now Ukraine is on the side of Israel and theoretically America, or at least the American president. And now Russia's on the side of Iran. But wait, it gets worse because Lindsey Graham's last act was demanding that we do sanctions against China and India for doing trade with Russia. So they're now putting China and India on the other side of the war, potentially. Right? They haven't taken any physical action yet, kinetic action yet, but now we're financially putting them on the other side of that. This is not now. It's not anywhere near an exaggeration to say, yeah, this is what a world war looks like.
Here is what Cenk claimed. Enough theaters are now coupled that calling it World War III is no longer an exaggeration. Iran, Israel, the United States, regional spillover, Ukraine hitting Iran-linked targets, Russia with Iran, pressure on China and India. Here is a counter. Dangerous? Yes. World War III? Not because you can list conflicts in one breath. A world war is integrated coalition warfare at global scale. It is not many bad wars exist at once. This rhetoric does political work. It turns a logistic strike into apocalypse theater. It makes any cost and position look insane. And it avoids the harder question. How do you make Russia not want to keep grinding? Fear is not a theory of allied entry triggers. Fear is not a theory of nuclear thresholds. Fear is not a theory of command integration. Here is a documented truth. Multi-theater stress and overextension risk are real. That supports caution. That supports industrial and alliance seriousness. It does not license World War III as a substitute for mechanism.
People happens to be Laura Loomer, who recently did a complete 180 on Ukraine. And I want to show you a little of what she had to say during her meeting with Zelensky and what she felt after her visit. Take a look.
I've received messages all day from different people in media and politics and people just who follow me online who said, wow, I didn't realize how much we've been lied to. Wow, you really opened my eyes. Or wow, that I had no idea that they had tougher anti-Semitism laws in Ukraine than they have in the United States, right? And people really honestly believe in the United States that this is a country run by Nazis and that this country is full of Nazis. That's what people believe. And I mean, I was shocked too. I had no idea. I came here and I had to learn all this information myself, but I was consuming media that was propaganda.
The Young Turks spend time on Laura Loomer's flip on Ukraine. They treat it like proof of an Israeli-influenced network installing a new warmonger in Trump's ear. Maybe opportunists flip. Lobby networks exist. Investigate that with evidence. But in the same segment, they already explained Trump's thaw without this. Drones. Winners. Relationship repair. Quid pro quo. If the boring explanation works, and you still need a secret hand, your theory is addicted to villains. Transactional politics explains more than unverified asset fan fiction.
Things here. Number one, I'm done officially with supporting the Ukrainians' war. So it's been a long time now. I don't know, they seem like they've been at war for about 18 years now. So the reason I was in favor of it, because Russia attacked them. It was definitely Russian aggression. Yes, there were reasons and excuses, etc. Bottom line is, you attack someone like Israel attacks Lebanon, it's Israel's fault. Russia attacks Ukraine, it's Russia's fault. So number two, we had promised the Ukrainians defense when we had them give up their nuclear weapons. Okay, but now we've supported you for about 87 years in a row in this war. There's a limit to how long we can go. What if the war goes for 2 centuries? Do we still owe you, right? So now...
Cenk also says Russia was wrong to invade, but support has gone on long enough. So he is done. Aid limits are a real debate. I am done is not an endgame. If you still say Russia's the aggressor, you owe a theory of enforcement and deterrence after aid shrinks. Otherwise, you condemn the crime and abandon the cost of stopping it. Then you fill the gap with conspiracy about why the map looks bad. Let's move on to breaking points. And Scott Horton, this is the prestige version. Footnotes, timelines, a book title provoked, not justified. Horton is right that American arrogance is part of the prehistory. He is wrong when that becomes a one-defendant theory of the war.
Invasion from Russia just came out of nowhere. It was quote-unquote unprovoked. Give us some of the highlights. Obviously, it's a lengthy book and people need to read it to understand the full picture. But give us some of the milestones on the road to this quote-unquote unprovoked invasion of Ukraine.
Okay, well, first of all, at the end of the last Cold War, the Americans knew they were lying. I mean, I really thought it was Bill Clinton, but it really was George H.W. Bush and his team before Bill Clinton ever came to town. They were telling the Russians what they needed to hear to get them to acquiesce to American plans, while all along they were planning on expanding the NATO military alliance into Eastern Europe. They told the Russians that, look, we're going to use what had already existed since '75, the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, now known as the organization, the OSCE. We're going to use that, and we won't have an alliance anymore because there's no enemy. So we'll have a security partnership, and you and Ukraine and the rest will all be members of it together with us. And so this was the promise. And you know, as long as NATO was a military alliance, they promised not to expand it east. And I know that's disputed, but I'm right about it. And you can check my notes in the book and see the argument.
Here is what Scott Horton claimed. Washington lied at the end of the Cold War. America planned NATO expansion while telling Russia soft stories. They promised not to expand NATO east. Horton says that part is disputed. Then he says he is right about it. Here's the counter. No, Horton is not simply right about that promise. The Soviet leader in those talks later said the opposite. In 2014, Mikhail Gorbachev said the topic of NATO expansion was not discussed at all in those years. He said Baker's not 1-inch line was about the former East Germany after reunification, not a blanket promise that Eastern Europe could never join NATO, and the part that was real got written down. The 2+4 settlement limited foreign forces and nuclear weapons in the former GDR. Gorbachev said that German obligation was legally enshrined and observed. So Horton's move is this. Take contested 1990 talk, inflate it into a settled blood oath against enlargement, ignore Gorbachev's own later clarification, then treat 2022 as America's authored war. Eastern Europeans also had agency. They asked to join because they feared Russia. Treating their membership as only American deceit deletes them from the story. Even if you dislike later NATO enlargement, that still does not convert Russia's full-scale invasion into Washington's war. Foreseeable hostility is not entitled conquest. A provoked crisis is not an authored invasion. Horton says the book is title provoked, not justified. Good. Then stop talking like the promise dispute settles the authorship of 2022. Here is a documented truth. 1. Gorbachev later said NATO expansion was not discussed as a promise in those years. Baker's line in his account was about the former GDR.
People ask me why it was not stipulated in the treaty that NATO must not expand to the east. The following should be taken into account. NATO and the Warsaw Pact existed at that time. What was there to fix in a treaty? The question did not even arise back then. In other words, it is a myth that you were betrayed by the West regarding NATO's eastward expansion. Yes, it's definitely a myth.
2. The only formal written settlement from those talks was the 1990 German reunification treaty. It limited foreign troops and nuclear weapons in the former East Germany. It was not a treaty banning Poland, the Baltics, or Ukraine from alliances forever. 3. Eastern Europeans sought NATO because they feared Russian domination. That agency is part of record. 4. Putin still ordered a full-scale invasion. He denied full Ukrainian nationhood in public ideology, and he pursued annexation and occupation. Those actions go far beyond just the stop NATO missiles excuses used.
Produce the treaty. They talk about the treaty now like it's completely insane. Oh, he says that we should move all our military forces back to where they were in 1997. Yeah, but that was the blood oath that Bill Clinton had signed and promised. That's not 1897. That's just 1997.
Horton also leans on early assurances and 1997 baselines, like a blood oath, as if refusing rollback is simple bad faith. Same move as the not 1-inch claim. Stretch contested talk into sacred law. Even though Gorbachev later said NATO expansion was not discussed as that kind of promise, diplomatic history can be messy. It is still not a treaty freezing Eastern Europe forever, and it is not a license for maximalist rollback demands in 2021 and 2022. Return military infrastructure toward 1997 is not a tiny cleanup clause. It is a sphere of influence demand over societies that do not want a Russian veto. You can criticize later NATO enlargement without granting Moscow ownership of its neighbors' alliances, and without pretending Horton settled the 1990 promise debate by declaring himself right.
was the Maidan Revolution, the so-called Revolution of Dignity in 2014. And people say, oh, you're denying the agency of the people on the ground. Well, look, I mean, the reality is Ukraine is a small, poor country, and America is the global superpower. So when the empire drops a few tens or hundreds of millions of dollars into your protest movement, that makes all the difference. Just imagine for one moment the Occupy movement of a decade ago, or January 6th. Only now you have Chinese or Russian agents out there with, supplying, not just, everybody focuses on the sandwiches and cookies. It's not that Newland was there passing out cookies. It's that, what was she doing there at all? She was there blatantly supporting the revolution and telling the people America's on your side. She had Senators Chris Murphy and John McCain with her. And they spent tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars on the NGOs that supported the entire carnival to keep the thing going for 3 solid months until they could get their deal to force the president to agree to new elections, which led to the street putsch, which was accomplished by local Nazi forces on the ground. And this is another one that's important. And I beat this dead horse beyond any reason in the book, because I know the burden of proof is on me. I know everyone says that this is all just Russian propaganda, but I think we all, if you went to a government school, even in my era, then you probably have heard of the fact that when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, some people in the border countries welcomed them.
Yes.
Because they'd been enslaved under Soviet communism. Is the worst thing that ever happened to them. And when the Nazis came, some people sided with them, and that includes in Ukraine. But the people who sided with the Nazis in Ukraine, they were really bad guys. It wasn't just, people from out west. They were already Nazis. They were already, organized groups of Nazis that came and swore their loyalty to Hitler and served him in the war. Then those same forces were supported by the CIA during the Cold War through the end of the 1950s as part of a stay-behind type operation. People are probably familiar with Gladio. That's in Western Europe, but this is the same kind of thing, supporting stay-behind forces during the Cold War. And then after that, the fighting fell apart and ended in the 50s. America, the CIA and whatever, still supported all the Ukrainian exile groups in the United States and Canada, many of which were founded by Nazi exiles and expats who had escaped after World War II. And then even beginning in the 80s with Glasnost and Perestroika, but especially in the 90s and then after 2004, these groups poured a ton of money in to reestablish all these Nazi militias and to rewrite the whole history of Ukraine to try to make George Washington and Nathaniel Greene out of these guys, because they had no real heroes to be the founders of their state. So their heroes are a bunch of Hitler-serving Nazis.
Here is what Horton claimed. Maidan was effectively a U.S.-backed regime change operation. Ukraine is too small and poor for agency to matter against empire money, and far-right forces did the putsch muscle. Here's the counter. U.S. influence was real. Say it. American officials openly backed the protest camp. External funding and networks mattered. Far-right militants punched above their weight in street violence. Russia then seized Crimea and fueled war in Donbass. Now the counter. Influence is not authorship of a people. Millions of Ukrainians mobilized against a corrupt president who used violence. Yanukovych's position collapsed domestically. After 2014, Ukrainian politics repeatedly rejected Russian domination. In 2022, the liberators with flowers fantasy failed because Ukrainians did not want to be recolonized. If your Maidan story needs Ukrainians to be NPCS funded into existence by the State Department, you swapped official propaganda for anti-imperial propaganda. Same structure, different jersey. And the Nazi genealogy master key is the same trick. A real far-right problem gets inflated into the essence of Ukrainian state. So the whole war becomes a Nazi-adjacent Western project versus provoked Russia. That cannot survive Zelensky's election. That cannot survive mass mobilization. And that cannot survive Russian infiltration and occupation practices. Here is a documented truth. Maidan was domestic revolt, plus elite defection, plus Western influence, plus ugly far-right violence, plus Russian counter-escalation. Any story that keeps only the Western villain real is incomplete on purpose.
Used to negotiate in good faith or accommodate Russian legitimate security concerns in any way whatsoever. And let me just one more sentence here. The book is titled Provoked. It's not titled Justified. Peace agreement in February of 2015 The American government refused to pressure Kiev to implement it. They tried to change the deal. No.
Here is what Horton claimed. Putin had legitimate security concerns. America refused to negotiate in good faith, and Washington preferred a long war that bleeds Russia. Here's the counter. Some Russian fears were real. NATO near Russia. Missiles. Alliance tripwires. Adults can talk about armed control and neutrality without being Kremlin agents. But Horton mixes that with something else. Russia deciding Ukraine's alliances. Russia deciding how Ukraine can arm itself. Russia deciding Ukraine's politics. That is not security. That is a veto over a neighbor. Saying no to that is not bad faith. It is refusing a sphere of influence. Yes, some American hawks talked about bleeding Russia. That is ugly. It still does not mean Russia had to invade. And it does not make Ukraine's defense illegitimate. Here is the documented truth. 1. Security concerns can be real and still get used as cover for domination. 2. Putin's own words denied full Ukrainian nationhood.
Во-первых, эта ситуация не такая же, а принципиально другая. А во-вторых, мы не добиваемся капитуляции со стороны Украины. Мы настаиваем на признании реалий, которые сложились на земле. Я уже много раз говорил, что считаю русский и украинский народ одним народом на самом деле. В этом смысле вся Украина наша. Безусловно, есть люди, их немало в соседней стране, которые стремятся к обеспечению своего суверенитета, независимости, ну и дай Бог здоровья. И мы, кстати говоря, никогда не подвергали сомнению, право украинского народа на независимость и суверенитет. Но, знаете, у нас есть такая старинная, это не поговорка, не притча, а старинное правило. Там, где ступает нога русского солдата, то наша. Но они создали угрозу нам, начали создавать по всей линии государственной границы с Украиной, в двух других соседних областях.
3. The 2021 demands mixed possible bargains with maximalist control over Ukraine. 4. Understanding Russia is not the same as accepting a veto over Ukraine. I want to make one last Horton point. He suggests Ukraine and Donbass sovereignty do not really matter to America, and rules-based order is mostly empire branding. Direct dirt in Donbass does not change life in Texas. Fine, but conquest backed by nuclear intimidation in Europe changes alliance behavior from Warsaw to Taipei. Credibility and contagion are interests. If all that does not matter, then that is isolationist accounting, and that ignores second-order effects. Watching all this, there is a clear pattern across these shows. Hasan sells the Caspian strike as Ukraine is dragging America in, or they are joining the Iran war for Trump. The Young Turks sell merge wars in secret hands. And Last Horton sells Washington wrote it. These are different styles. They have the same method. They take a fact, then they invent a motive, and then tell a total story. Here is what the record supports. Russia launched an unjustified full-scale invasion. Ukraine has agency. Messy, dependent, but real. U.S. and NATO arrogance helped create a predictable confrontation. That still does not make America the author of Russia's war. Caspian strikes are supply warfare, not proof Kiev wants nuclear war with Russia or that Ukraine became Israel. Overlapping interests are not identity. Multi-theater stress is real. It still does not invent Kiev's motive for you. Real peace needs change Russian incentives and enforcement, not motive fan fiction. Here's the adult question. What package of pressure and credible guarantees changes Russia's math without lighting the continent on fire? That question is hard. That is why narratives sell. Left media often smell cynicism correctly. Then too many shows replace one simplified story with another. If your anti-war politics cannot survive contact with Russian agency and Ukrainian agency at the same time, it is not geopolitics. Start with a document. Keep the fact. Interrogate the motive. Refuse the total story when evidence does not buy it. The truth is uglier than propaganda and more boring than conspiracy. That boredom is where reality lives.